morning. I want to I need to give thanks for a man in my life that I have never met this morning. His name is Ralph Waldo Beeson. You probably don't know Ralph, Mr. Beeson. You probably don't know him. I've never met him, never had a chance to meet him, but he is the reason that I was able to receive a full scholarship to go back to school and to earn a doctorate degree. It was his gift to the seminary that led to the opportunity for me to have all my classes paid for, all my books paid for, to move my family to Kentucky, to put us up in a place to live. And I'll never forget living on $1,200 stipend a month for a year. Think about that for a second. Also, I was able to travel and study church development and travel around the world because of this scholarship. Mr. Beeson gave to the Asbury Seminary $58 million. One of the largest gifts ever given to any institution of higher education. If you go look at the list is about 75 gifts long of the largest gifts ever given to higher education. You'll see Harvard, Yale, Stanford, all these wonderful gifts and donations from wealthy families, and there you see Mr. Beeson's name in that list to Asbury Seminary. And as I began to learn a little bit about Mr. Beeson's life, I found out that he was an insurance salesman. He sold insurance for his livelihood. He also, he was a multi-millionaire. He made millions and millions of dollars, had personal wealth beyond our imagination, and he gave most of it away. He lived in a very modest home, much like you and I live in, and he had so modest that he didn't even have air conditioning in his home. And he gave away everything. He gave away more than he kept for himself, basically. And I thought about that generosity that he had in his spirit. And when they asked him, and when he was asked, I found this quote from him. When he was asked about why he gave all his money away, why he was so generous, he said this. He said, "It's the Lord's money. He," meaning God, "gave me the gift of making it. I'm not smart enough to make that much money on my own. And I'm going to give it back to God." You see, he rightly understood that he was simply a steward of what God had given to him. He rightly understood that really everything I have is from God. It belongs to God, and I'm just giving it back to the one who gave it to me. I have been blessed beyond imagination with this wealth because God enabled me to do that. God gave me the opportunity to do that. And so he wanted to be generous because he wanted to show other people God's generosity towards him. I think that's part of the heart of a steward. And I think God wants us to be generous people. God desires for us to be generous people. I think we desire to be generous people. I think we want to be those people that God has called us to be. And some of the things that we learn actually in this parable this morning of this steward, how many people heard this parable and said, I have no idea what this is about? I mean, I felt the same way, okay? You look at that and you go, what is going on here? What I like about this parable is this is one of the few parables where Jesus actually says it's okay to be wealthy. And in fact, if we're good, there's nothing wrong with being wealthy, because a lot of times he's telling people, go sell everything and give it to the poor. But here Jesus seems to be affirming our being wealthy, but also pointing out the lesson of what we do with that wealth. That's the point of the passage. What are we doing with the wealth that God has given us? How are we doing that? So he understood, and the steward understood that he was accountable, right? He was called to give an account for how he was stewarding the things of his master. And if we understand stewardship, we are, in a sense, called to account to how we use what God has given us. So there is a judgment day. It wasn't yesterday, if you've been following the news, where I don't know how to take this, that I'm still here today. We're all here today. Does that mean that we missed something, or does that mean that it really didn't happen? I'm going to go with the latter. But there is this idea that, all the stewards are called to account. And so the master calls the steward to account for how he's using the master's resources. And so the steward is in trouble because someone's accused him. We don't know whether it's true or not. We just know he's been accused. And so he's thinking, I've got to give an account. I am responsible for what my master has entrusted to me and how I'm using this. And so he begins to think about this, and he goes, oh man, I'm in trouble. But what he rightly understands is what? That it's not his, right? It doesn't belong to him. It's not his wealth that he's managing, it's somebody else's wealth that he's managing. He understands that it's from somebody else, and we understand that his master may have been a landlord. And the landlord was probably, the tenants paid the landlord in terms of like or in-kind gifts like olive oil or wheat, because that's probably what they harvested or used the land for, and so they had to give a portion of what they had grown back to the master. And so this is what they're doing. Now, what the steward always understands, and I think a good steward always understands, is that it doesn't belong to them. How many people know Bill Gates? You've heard of Bill Gates, right? Multi-billionaire, right? I don't know how many billions. I don't even know how much this gentleman is worth. He's worth a lot of money, right? We all know that. One of the things that we also know is that Bill Gates Foundation gives away a lot of those resources and that generosity. He's very generous. You know, I was thinking about that. You know, how did Bill Gates get all that money? I mean, was it his hard work? Yeah, it was his hard work. Was it his giftedness and his skills? Yeah, it was. But I also want to say that the reason that Bill Gates is wealthy is because God had a hand in his life. Here's one way. The very fact that Bill Gates was born into the United States, when he was born in the United States, had a tremendous impact on how much money he made. He was born in Seattle, Washington, to two wealthy parents, professionals, who sent him to a private school in the 7th grade. Now, in the 7th grade, this was 1968, the women of the school had a rummage sale. And they collected all this money, and in a wealthy community, you make a lot of money at a rummage sale. And they made a lot of money, and the women, for some reason, we don't know why, and I don't know why, they decided to buy the first computer for their school. 1968. The first computer. Now, the first computer in 1968 was this computer. If you can see it, that's the ASR-33. Now, this was the most technologically advanced computer at the time that you could work on in 1968. How many people had personal computers in 1968? Here's another question. How many colleges had computers like this in 1968? None. Hardly any. But this computer was hardwired into a mainframe in downtown Seattle, and this time you had to share time on the mainframe to do any computer work. And so this was a very advanced technology for a 7th grader to have access to in 1968. Bill Gates began his first lessons in learning to program computers on that machine as a 7th grader. Bill Gates didn't do anything to earn that opportunity, did he? That opportunity came to him. It was a gift from God. Literally, because of where he was born, about who he was born, what family he was born to, and because he was in a school at the right time. And what happened to technology after in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s as he began to develop along with it? It was about opportunity. And God gives us opportunities. Now, it was his hard work and his determination that took that opportunity and seized that opportunity. But we tend to forget that really everything we have ultimately is from God, is a result of God. I mean, think about it. If you and I had been born somewhere else in the world, would we have what we have today? We probably wouldn't. If you and I, or if I had not had the opportunity to go back and get a doctorate degree, would I have had the opportunities I have today? Probably not. You see, God has a hand in everything that we have, in everything that we own. It's not ours all the time. It's what God has given us. It's what God has entrusted to us in this life. The other thing about this parable is that what we have a hard time figuring out, and I want to unpack a little bit here this morning, is that the steward was also was not cheating his master. We tend to look at that parable and we think, oh, well, he cheated his master out of the money. Well, if you dig a little deeper in there, you'll see that he took 100 bushels of wheat, and he cut it to 80, and 100 jugs of olive oil and cut it to 50. And you're thinking, well, that doesn't sound fair. You know, one person gets a 50% discount and the other person gets a 20% discount. But if you look closer at that, the value of the 50 jugs of oil and the value of the 20 bushels of wheat were equal in monetary value, about 500 denarii. And so what scholars think happened here is that this steward was cutting out his commission, because it was his commission that he had responsibility over. And so he was generously giving away his commission to these other folks in hopes that they would welcome him into their homes later. So he's cutting his commission. He's not cheating his master. He's giving away what is rightfully his in this system of economy. And what he's doing is he's literally planning ahead, isn't he? He's got a financial plan. He's putting some planning in place and he's using his generosity, and he's being faithful and planning his generosity, hoping that it will pay off later, hoping that it will make a difference. Let me illustrate that a little bit this morning. You've probably been wondering why these apples are up here, right? Oh yeah, everybody's been sitting there all morning. What's he going to do with the apples? 10 apples here this morning. Think about these 10 apples as to what God gives us, right? So, how many apples do we give to our mortgage? There's 10 apples, so how much of our income goes to our mortgage? 20%? 30%? 50%? No, I'm just kidding. But to our personal mortgage, maybe 2 or 3 apples. Well, in that ballpark, that's maybe what some of us have in a mortgage. We've also God provides an apple for us for food and clothing, right? Everybody eats, right? Everybody's got clothes on this morning. That's a good thing, including me. We also have car payments. You know, we may have car payments. We've gone out and bought cars, and that may be 1 or 2 more apples, depending on how many cars and how many car payments we have. And hopefully we're putting some aside for savings and for the future, or if some of us have college educations coming up that we need to spend money on, we've got that set aside. And what else utilities, cable, cell phones, what else? Heat, electricity, all those things. And, you know, hopefully we're also having some fun and reading some books and maybe taking a vacation every year and the cost of that. And then there's 1 apple left. And the whole idea in the Bible is that God says, you know, give back 1/10. Your first fruit, actually it's called. Your first fruit, not your last fruit, but your first fruit. To give back 1/10 of what God has already given us. To set aside 1/10 and to give it back to God. And what God is saying and what the biblical principle is here is plan to be generous. Plan to give part of what God has already given you back to God and God's purposes and God's needs in the world. So it looks good up here on the table, doesn't it? But I think what happens if we don't plan to be generous, what happens is, you know, my car payments are done and my car is needing a little, you know, maybe it's just not running right. You know, I need to go get a new car. And typically when I buy a new car, I don't know how this goes with you, but I typically buy a little bit nicer car than what I just had. And I go and I look at my car payment and I go, you know, cost of cars have gone up now, and you know, and I really would like this car instead of the car I've been driving, and I've got this much money, but you know, I need some more money to get the car that I really want. And so I look at all my income that's already devoted to everything else, and I think, where am I going to get the extra money to go buy that new car? And I look over there at God's apple, and I think, is God really going to mind? I mean, God doesn't really need this apple. I can take some of it for myself. Oh, yeah. That's good. That's a good. I love this new car. You see my new car? It's great. I love it. Don't I look nice in it? And so, that's pretty good this morning. Okay. Then one morning I get up and I open up the Sunday paper, and there's this big stack of advertisements. You know the big stack of advertisements? I pull out the Best Buy advertisement. You know they got new 3D TVs out there? 3D TV, you can have surround sound system, 3D glasses. I thought that would be pretty good. The kids will love this, right? So I think I'm going to go spend a couple $1,000s, maybe $2,000, $3,000 on this brand new big 3D TV, and also going to get surround sound to go with it. But, you know, where am I going to get the money? Well, I already took one bite, why not another, right? So God's not going to mind. God's not going to miss that. I mean, you know, I need that. And so, that's a nice 3D TV I just got. You know, have you seen the new iPad 2? Oh, yeah, that's going to be good, man. I got to have that. iPad 2. That's good. You know, I really like going to Hawaii. So I think that'd be nice to go to Hawaii this year. Oh, that's good. I love the sun, the beach. Then along comes the church. And the pastor stands up and begs and pleads and says we have needs, that God's family has needs, that there are people in Sandtown that need a house, there are people who need a home through grassroots, there are compassion children that need to be blessed and be taken care of, and we go and we have already committed everything that we have, and so we go grab this and we give it. And what are we giving? Leftovers. We're giving leftovers. The average American churchgoer gives 2% to charity. God always asks us to set aside a tenth. Now, you may not be there this morning. You may be the 2%er. You may be the 1%er. That's okay. That's not the point. The point is, what does God want me to do? Where does God want me to be generous? We can be more generous than we are, and God desires for us, and I think we desire to be generous. I think we want to be generous. But part of the problem is there's nothing wrong with any of those things. There's nothing wrong with an iPad. There's nothing wrong with taking a nice vacation. There's nothing wrong with buying a new car. That's not the issue. The issue is planning to be generous. To already say, I'm already setting this aside for God's purposes. And I'm going to live on the other 9 apples. And you know what I found out as I do this? Is that I can still buy the iPad 2 with my other 9 apples. I can still go on vacation with my other 9 apples. I can still do all those things with my other 9 apples if I plan for it. If I plan for it. And a good steward, the heart of a steward does that, plans to be generous. And I think the last thing that Jesus rightly points out here in this parable, and the question is, you know, the steward does what? The steward doesn't know whether or not he's going to be welcomed into people's homes, does he? He gives away his commission. He is generous towards other people, hoping, maybe even trusting, that he'll be welcomed into their homes. And the point that Jesus is making is that, do we trust God? Do we trust God that when we're generous, are we trusting that God will be generous to us? That God will take care of us when we're generous? When we give something away, are we trusting God to provide for us? Because really that's part of it, isn't it? Can I really trust that God's going to take care of me? And the other thing that Jesus is saying is not only is this about us trusting God, but it's also about the question, can God trust us? Right? That's the question that Jesus is raising is, can we be trusted? If we're given a little, then are we faithful with a little? And if we're faithful with a little, then we'll be given more to be entrusted to. And so the question is, the steward is, can I be trusted? Can God trust me with what God has given? Am I trustworthy? Am I faithful as a steward? And that is so important. I'll just wrap up with this story. We sold our home, and I know some of you have been having houses on the market or have not been putting houses on the market. We put our house on the market at a very tough time in the market, probably the worst time, the lull, the worst possible time in the market. And I'll never forget that time because, I remember sitting with the realtor and I saying, he's like, this isn't a really good time to put your house on the market. I said, I know, but we got to go. We don't have a choice here. And we're going to trust God's going to take care of it. I remember saying that. I remember saying, we're just going to pray about this and trust that God's going to take care of it. And so we put our house on the market on Thursday. And our house, the realtor came back Sunday night with a contract on our house. And so I was like, this is cool. This is a good thing, right? Thank you, God, for taking care of us. And the realtor sat down with us, presented us the contract, and said to us, this is a good offer, but I think we can get a few more $1,000s here, is what the realtor said. And I remember thinking about that, and I said, okay, and realtors doing their job. I'm not faulting the realtor. Realtors doing what the realtor's supposed to do for their client. But here's the note that came along with that contract. It says this. It's from the couple that bought our house. He said, we wanted to thank you for allowing us to view your lovely home this weekend. We feel that God has led us to put down roots in the Frederick area, and your home would be a good fit for our family. It is close to our church and our children's activities. Thank you for your time in considering our offer. And when the realtor said, we could get a few more $1,000s out of this offer, I said to him, did you read this note? God's at work here. And we're not going to stand in the way of God. And we didn't do that. We accepted the offer as is. Because, one, we were trusting God. And we also felt that God was trusting us to be faithful and to be generous. Amen.